In a forgotten village where the sun rose over broken rooftops and hope seemed like a distant dream, life had been unchanged for generations. Children grew up knowing only hardship, fetching water instead of holding books, and working fields instead of attending school. The world had moved on, but this village remained stuck in the silence of neglect. That is, until one man, an ordinary visitor with an extraordinary heart, stepped onto the dusty roads with a vision far greater than charity. He didn't come to drop off aid and disappear. He came to listen, to understand, and to build something that would last. This isn't just a story about giving. This is a story about transformation. What happened next would shift the fate of an entire community, unleashing waves of change that touched every home, every heart, and every future. From the first brick laid to the first girl who raised her hand in class, this was more than a donation. It was a revolution in the making. If you've ever questioned whether one person can truly make a difference, this story will not only answer that question, it will make you believe in the power of one like never before. In a remote stretch of land untouched by progress and largely unseen by the outside world, there lay a village steeped in silence, not the peaceful kind, but the kind born from generations of struggle and neglect. Dirt paths carved through the landscape like forgotten scars. Homes were simple structures, made of sun-baked clay and scraps of tin. There were no schools, no clinics, no electricity. The sound of laughter was rare, replaced by the creak of water jugs carried for miles and the cries of hunger echoing from mud-walled homes. Children grew up without classrooms or books, and their dreams were stifled before they could form. Parents worked relentlessly, not for advancement, but for survival, just to see another day. The world beyond seemed like a myth, unreachable and uninvited. This wasn't just a poor village. It was a place that had been abandoned by time, by policy, and by hope. The people didn't ask for luxury, they longed for opportunity. But even that seemed like too much to wish for. Until one day, everything began to change. On an ordinary morning, with no fanfare or warning, a stranger arrived in the village, a man named Daniel. He didn't come in a luxury vehicle or flanked by a camera crew. There were no press releases, no promises, no speeches. Just a quiet man with worn shoes, a notebook in hand, and a deep sense of purpose in his eyes. Unlike others who had come before only to leave after a photo, Daniel stayed. He walked the same dusty paths the villagers tread every day. He sat under trees and listened, not just with his ears, but with his heart. He asked questions no one else bothered to ask. What do you dream about? What do your children hope to become? And when the villagers replied, he didn't interrupt. He didn't try to fix anything. He just listened. In that quiet act of presence, he saw the dignity behind the struggle, the resilience beneath the hardship. Daniel wasn't searching for problems to solve. He was searching for people to empower. And though he arrived as a stranger, something about his presence made it feel like a long-lost friend had finally come home. Daniel could have done what many well-meaning visitors do, donated food, handed out clothes, taken pictures, and left with a fleeting sense of accomplishment. But what he saw in the village demanded something deeper. He realized this wasn't just a place in need of temporary aid. It was a place starving for opportunity, for the kind of change that doesn't come and go, but stays and grows. To Daniel, the true tragedy wasn't just the lack of infrastructure, it was the absence of belief. He saw children with bright eyes who had never held a pencil. He saw parents who had given up dreaming, not because they lacked imagination, but because they had no reason to believe things could ever be different. Charity alone wouldn't fix this. What the village needed was a seed, a foundation that could take root in their lives and change the soil of their future. That's when Daniel's vision began to take shape. He decided to build not just a school, but a sanctuary of hope. A place where children could learn, yes, but also where an entire community could rise. He envisioned a structure made not only of bricks, but of purpose. He didn't want to simply deliver help, he wanted to ignite transformation. He chose education because he believed it was the most powerful tool a community could ever hold. It could break the cycle of poverty, restore dignity, and plant possibility in the hearts of the forgotten. Daniel wasn't offering a handout. He was planting a legacy. one that would belong to the villagers themselves, and most importantly, one they would come to believe in. The transformation didn't begin with the sound of machines or the arrival of outside workers. It began with the hands of the villagers themselves. Daniel's approach wasn't to impose a solution, but to invite the community to be part of creating it. The very first brick of the school was laid by a local elder, his hands trembling not from age, but from emotion. Around him stood men, women, and children, some carrying water, others mixing cement, and many simply watching with awe as something they had only dreamed of began to take shape. For the first time in years, the village echoed with a sound long forgotten. Hope being built, quite literally, from the ground up. It wasn't just about constructing walls. It was about constructing belief. Belief that they were capable, that their labor mattered, and that this building would be theirs in every way. Every task became an act of purpose. Mothers who once walked miles for water now brought it daily to the construction site. Young boys who had never seen a classroom lifted wooden beams with pride. Even those who couldn't physically contribute offered songs, meals, and encouragement to the workers. The site became a place of shared purpose and unity, dissolving long-standing divisions and healing quiet resentments. The school wasn't just being built in the village, it was being built by the village. And in that process, something extraordinary happened. The people who once waited for help became the very architects of their own future. What Daniel had sparked was no longer his vision alone. It was now the heartbeat of an entire community, rising brick by brick. The sun rose gently over the village on the first day of school, but it felt like a completely different world. Children who had never owned a single book walked barefoot with shy excitement, clutching newly gifted backpacks and pencils like treasures. For many of them, this was their first time entering a classroom. Some were nervous, others curious, but all of them were filled with wonder. Parents stood nearby, some wiping tears from their eyes, watching their sons and daughters step into a future they themselves were never offered. The once quiet, dusty clearing was now alive with laughter, chatter, and the sounds of learning. It wasn't just the beginning of an academic year, it was the rebirth of a village's hope. Inside the modest classrooms, painted by the villagers themselves, simple wooden desks awaited their first students. A chalkboard stood tall, ready to hold dreams spelled out in shaky handwriting. The teachers, two locals trained through Daniel's initiative, welcomed each child by name. They weren't just teaching letters and numbers, they were teaching possibility. That first day marked more than enrollment. It was a declaration that these children mattered, that their dreams were valid, and that their potential would no longer be limited by their geography. The school bell didn't just ring for class, it rang in a new era. For the first time, the village wasn't waiting for change. It was learning to create it. When the school opened its doors, something truly groundbreaking began to unfold. Girls, who had once been confined to household chores or early marriages, were now sitting side by side with boys in the classroom. For the first time, they were being given the same opportunity to learn, dream, and lead. It wasn't just about teaching girls how to read and write, it was about telling them they mattered. It was about rewriting years of cultural norms that had silenced their voices. Some came to class in hand-me-down uniforms and sandals worn thin by long walks, but their spirits were unbreakable. Their eyes lit up with every new word learned, every problem solved. And slowly, their presence began to shift the entire energy of the village. As these young girls began to flourish in the classroom, the ripple effect was felt throughout the community. Fathers who had once questioned the need for their daughters to attend school now listened intently as those same daughters read aloud stories and shared their dreams of becoming doctors, teachers, and leaders. Mothers, inspired by their daughters' courage, began attending adult literacy classes, realizing it was never too late to learn. Education gave these girls a sense of voice and value, and in doing so, it began to change mindsets, break cycles, and strengthen the village from within. As the girls rose, so did everyone around them. The community wasn't just witnessing progress, they were living it, powered by the very daughters they had once underestimated. The school, though built for children, quickly became the heartbeat of the entire village. After school hours, The classrooms transformed into spaces for adult education, vocational training, and community meetings. Parents who had never been inside a school before sat together on wooden benches, learning how to write their names, manage their household finances, or understand basic health practices. Farmers came to attend workshops on better crop techniques, while young adults took part in skill development classes that introduced them to sewing, carpentry, or small-scale entrepreneurship. The building that once stood as a mere shelter now pulsed with life, learning, and possibility, serving every generation, not just the youngest. More than just a place of education, the school became a sanctuary for unity and progress. It offered a common ground where people of different ages, beliefs, and roles came together with a shared purpose: to grow. Celebrations, problem-solving gatherings, and even cultural nights were held in its courtyard. This sense of shared ownership brought the village closer than ever before. For a place once marked by silence and struggle, the school became a symbol of resilience and rebirth. It wasn't just changing minds, it was healing hearts, bridging gaps, and turning isolated lives into a thriving, connected community. The walls of that school echoed with more than lessons. They echoed with laughter, ideas, and the heartbeat of a village finding its strength. As the first batches of students began to graduate from the village school, something remarkable happened. These weren't just educated young people. They were visionaries shaped by hardship, compassion, and an unshakable belief in change. Many chose not to leave their village behind in search of better opportunities elsewhere. Instead, they returned with purpose. Some became teachers in the very classrooms where they once sat, now guiding the next generation with empathy and understanding. Others started small initiatives like tutoring programs, health awareness drives, or clean water projects that directly addressed the needs of their neighbors. These young leaders didn't see themselves as saviors. They saw themselves as stewards of a better future that had once been gifted to them. Their impact extended far beyond academics. These students, now adults, carried with them a lived example of what was possible through education. They inspired their younger siblings, challenged outdated mindsets, and brought new energy into community problem-solving. They were the living proof that investment in people, especially in the forgotten corners of the world, can yield lifelong returns. The village that had once been overlooked now had its own heroes, not in suits or from distant cities, but from within. These leaders stood tall not because of power or privilege, but because they had walked the path of transformation themselves, and were now paving it for others to follow. What began with a single person's decision to act became a legacy that continues to flourish. Daniel's gift wasn't just the building of a school. It was the belief in the untapped potential of a forgotten village. That belief sparked a movement that extended far beyond what he may have imagined. His one act inspired not just education, but innovation, self-reliance, and a renewed community spirit. Over time, others from outside the village took notice. NGOs, volunteers, and small organizations, inspired by the transformation, started to offer support, contributing books, technology, training, and healthcare services. All of this traced back to one moment of generosity that dared to believe change was possible, even in the most neglected of places. More importantly, the legacy lives on not just in projects or donations, but in people. Every child who steps into that school carries a part of that original spark forward. Every young adult who chooses to stay and serve becomes a branch of that growing tree of hope. What Daniel did proved something profoundly simple yet often forgotten, that you don't need to be famous, rich, or powerful to make a lasting difference. You just need to care enough to start. His story reminds us that one person, with a dream and the courage to act on it, can reshape an entire future. And in that small village, the echoes of his choice still ring loud. In every lesson taught, every life uplifted, and every hope restored. This story isn't just meant to inspire, it's meant to awaken something within us. Daniel's journey proves that world-changing impact doesn't require an army or a fortune. It only requires a heart willing to act. In a time where global problems can feel overwhelming and far away, this story brings the focus back to something we all possess: the ability to care, to contribute, and to believe in the potential of others. Whether it's building a school, funding a student's education, or even just sharing knowledge or time, every action matters. The transformation of the village didn't begin with a grand campaign. It began with listening, understanding, and the willingness to invest in people. We learned that change doesn't always come from governments or big institutions. It can start with you. More than anything, this story calls us to look around and ask, where can I begin? It challenges us to stop waiting for the perfect moment or the ideal resources and start with what we have. The lesson is clear. When we step beyond our comfort zones and give not just our money, but our time, attention, and belief, we spark a ripple effect. Daniel didn't just build a school. He created a legacy. You have that power too. This isn't just a story about one man changing a village. It's a mirror showing each of us what's possible when we stop asking, who will fix this, and start saying, why not me? As we reach the end of this powerful story, take a moment to reflect, not just on what Daniel did, but on what it means for the rest of us. In a world often distracted by headlines and noise, this quiet act of compassion stands tall as a reminder. One person can still make all the difference. It's not about how much you give, but how deeply you care. Daniel didn't show up with a spotlight or seek recognition. He showed up with purpose. And in doing so, he planted seeds that will bear fruit for generations. So ask yourself, what impact can you make? It might not be building a school, but maybe it's mentoring someone, supporting a cause, or simply believing in someone who's forgotten how to believe in themselves. Because transformation doesn't always require a grand gesture, it just needs a spark. And that spark could come from you. Thank you for watching, and if this story moved you, don't let it end here. Share it. Act on it. Let it be the beginning of your own legacy, because sometimes the most powerful change starts with just one heart willing to try.